All right, today, guys, we're going to talk about the Trojan War, which is a pretty exciting story. And it actually comes from some Greek literature that we've talked a little bit about. And we're going to go over what the mythology is. Was it real? Was it fake? Was it just mythology? And we'll find out all about that today. And it was a pretty big event in all of history, especially Greek history. And you've probably heard more about it than what you think. And this will give you some background information so that if you do hear about it in everyday passing, like things like the Trojan horse and stuff like that, then you'll know exactly what's going on. So that's what we're going to worry about today. All right, first of all, let's figure out where Troy is. Okay, now Troy is actually this place right here. Now, it was in an ancient area called Anatolia. Now, it is not in Anatolia. There's no such thing as Anatolia today. It's actually on the coast of the country of Turkey. The country, not the bird. Okay? I know that's what you're thinking. That country is not delicious like the bird. So, just wanted to let you know. Okay, so that's where Troy's at. Okay, and this happened during a time when people we talked about the Mycenaeans, which were kind of the first settlers to the Greeks and kind of developed the Greek culture and things like that. They were the ones that fought against these Trojans. And that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. Now, how it all started. It happened probably about 1200 BC. And the Mycenaeans, they fought a 10-year war against Troy, that city-state of Troy. And it was called the Trojan War. And the only thing that we knew about it for a long time had to do with the mythology of it, because it came from a book, and that was the only record of this war. And we'll get into it a little bit later, but for the longest time, archaeologists thought that it was just a book. It was just a story, and that never really happened, and there was no such thing as the Trojan War because they didn't find a city of Troy. They had no evidence that there was even a war, and if there was no city of Troy, how could somebody go to war against a city that doesn't exist? So for the longest time, they thought it was just a myth. And we'll talk about it, why they may not think that now. Okay? Now, the story began because according to mythology, that a Trojan prince, his name was Paris, he kidnapped Helen, who was the queen of a little city-state you might have heard of called Sparta. Now, you could probably think, we know about Sparta. Pretty tough. You're probably not going to make very many fans in Sparta if you're kidnapping the queen. Just saying. Okay? Now, like I said before, many historians thought for years and years and years that the place didn't exist. And about 1870, there was an archaeologist. His name was Heinrich Schliemann. He was German. Yeah, he was German. He spoke Deutsch. He suggested that those stories may not have been stories. They may have been based on real cities, real people, real events. But there was no proof. Okay? Now, later on in the 20th century, the last century, because we're in the 21st century, the 20th century is the one with the 1900s, all the way through 1999. The last century, they actually found what they believe was the city of Troy. Now, they don't know really the true reason why the war was fought. They don't even know if it really was fought. But they did find the city of Troy. And that's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about the story that we know. And not all that's been proven. The only thing that we know is there was a city of Troy. They found the ruins of Troy. Now, as you can see from the picture, not much there. Not much left. And that's why they had a hard time finding it, is because there's not much left there.
Wrong one.
Oh. We were going to talk about Homer, but that's not the Homer I was thinking about. No, not good. This is the Homer we're talking about. Much of what we know from the Trojan War came from these epic poems that were called the Iliad and the Odyssey. The Iliad was one poem, the Odyssey was another. And that had to surround the whole story of the Trojan War. I mean, that's where it came from. It's from Homer, not Simpson. This guy. This guy has an epic beard. So he wrote epic poems. Get it? Epic beard. Okay, all right. Anyway, the Iliad is a long story, and I had talked a little bit about the Iliad before and talked about how the Brad Pitt movie Troy is based on the poem The Iliad by Homer. So if you've ever seen that, or if you haven't, I don't know what it's rated, so if it's not rated for your age group, I would not suggest going to see it, because it is very violent. But I know 6th graders, you'll probably do it anyway, but there's not on me now. So there you go. So what the Iliad does, it kind of depicts the siege of Troy during the Trojan War. It talks about what happened whenever they basically destroyed Troy. Great Greek heroes like Achilles and Odysseus were introduced. Now, the Odyssey, on the other hand, the second poem, it focuses on a guy named Odysseus. Now, Odysseus was in the Iliad, but the Odyssey focuses on him and his journey back from Troy to his home called Ithaca. Now, here's the thing about that story, is it took him maybe 10 or 20 years to get back from Troy to Ithaca. Should have only taken a couple months. Yeah, he ran into a couple problems here and there. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Trojan War. Now, here's the mythology behind it. And when I say mythology, we know it wasn't true, that it didn't happen, because it had to do with the gods and goddesses of Greece. We know that they didn't exist. They're just stories. But this is the way that Homer said that the whole thing started, according to, and it had to do with the gods and goddesses kind of quarreling a little bit. And it starts with the marriage of Peleus and a sea goddess, Thetis. Now, Peleus and Thetis hadn't invited to their wedding the goddess of discord. Now, discord is a synonym for dispute, so fighting, basically. And her name was Eris. And she didn't get invited to the wedding. Well, all the other gods got invited. Well, Eris was mad about this, of course, because she's the goddess of disputes, fighting. So, of course, she would start a fight at a wedding. She showed up at their wedding and kind of crashed it and made a big scene and threw kind of a hissy fit. When she was leaving, when she was stomping out of the wedding, she threw this golden apple on the table, on one of the tables. And the apple belonged to, according to Eris, whoever was the fairest. Kind of like, the whole like, oh, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all? Well, this had to do with an apple, a golden apple, and it was called the golden apple of discord. Remember, discord means dispute or fight. So what happened was the table that it landed on had to do with sitting at that table was Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite. Now, each of them reached for the apple saying, oh, well, I'm the fair, so it must be mine. Well, of course, the three ladies, they each thought that, and they kind of started to fight a little bit about it. Now, Zeus was sitting at the table there, and he was like, enough. I'm tired of hearing you three fight over this apple. Let's have a mortal judge who is the fairest. So he picked the Prince of Troy, who was thought to be the most handsome guy in all of the ancient world during that time, and he would be the judge. Okay, so they all agreed to that, and each goddess went to Paris, the prince, not the city. It didn't exist yet. And to try to convince him who was the fairest so that he could say, oh yeah, so-and-so is the fairest. So they were kind of trying to bribe him a little bit, trying to get him on their side. Now, Hera, she's the first one that approached Paris. And she said that if he picked her, she would make him the most powerful king in all of the world. It's a pretty good offer. Okay, but he wanted to hear the other two and before he made a decision. So Athena, she came and she promised him wealth beyond his wildest dreams. That's a pretty good deal too. Now Aphrodite, now remember, she's the goddess of love. So you probably think what she's going to offer has to do with probably love. And it did. She promised him the most beautiful woman in the world. That's not bad either. So you either got most powerful king, richest person in all the world, you get more money you could even dream of, or the most beautiful woman in the world. Which would you pick? Well, who did Paris pick? Well, he picked Aphrodite because he thought the idea of having the most beautiful woman in the world, probably a good idea. I don't know. I probably would have taken the money, but I don't know. Anyway, this most beautiful woman, her name was Helen. And she is known throughout history as Helen of Troy. She caused a lot of trouble, and this had to do with the start of the Trojan War. Now, when Paris chose Aphrodite, she promised him this girl, who was named Helen. Problem was, little itty-bitty problem with Helen. She was married to the king of Sparta. His name is Menelaus. And Paris didn't think much of this little detail. He was like, whatever. Which is kind of mean. Okay, she's married. Hello. What a dog trying to go after a married woman. That's not good. But Paris set off for Sparta to claim his prize. And he was a little deviant. He was a little sneaky about it. Now, before he left, two prophets named Cassandra and Helenus warned Paris that if he did this, if he went to go get Helen, bad things were going to happen. It wasn't going to be good. So they tried to persuade him not to go. But he went anyway. He didn't listen. He set off for Sparta after Helen. Well, when Paris arrived in Sparta, Menelaus treated him as a royal guest because Paris came and said, hey, I'm from Troy. We want to trade with you guys. We want to be good friends. See, got kind of sneaky. So Menelaus said, hey, yeah, come on. We'll deal. We'll trade. We'll do whatever you need. Let's be friends. Well, that's the problem. Now, Menelaus had some urgent stuff that he had to take care of, so he left Sparta to attend a funeral. That's when Paris sprung into action. He actually abducted Helen, who perhaps they think maybe she went willingly, didn't put up much of a fight, and also took a bunch of Menelaus's money. What a jerk, huh? This guy Paris, not a nice guy. Now, Paris and Helen got married once they arrived in Troy. So I don't know how that worked because she was already married anyway, but oh well, whatever. Now, once Menelaus discovered that Helen was gone, of course, he was upset. He's angry, pretty angry. And he gathered some allies, some friends of his from the mainland of Greece to go get the Trojans because he thought, okay, this Trojan prince came here under the pretenses that, hey, we're going to be friends. And then when I left to go to a funeral and told him, hey, stay here, enjoy my food, enjoy my hospitality, and then he goes and snatches up my wife and my money. What a jerk. I'm going after him. I'm mad. So he sought out the help of many allies around the mainland of Greece, and he wanted to get help from the king of Ithaca, and his name was Odysseus. Now remember, Odysseus was the one that was the main character in the Odyssey, the book, the second book that Homer wrote. At first, Odysseus didn't want any part of it, but he eventually, as a favor to Menelaus, decided to fight because he made an oath long ago to defend Menelaus's wife's honor. And I guess this would probably be considered an attack on her honor, I guess. Now, Achilles. Now, here is a cool story about Achilles. Now, Achilles was sought out by Menelaus because an oracle told him of how Troy couldn't be defeated without Achilles. Now, here's the reason why. Now, Achilles was actually the son of the goddess Thetis. And she loved him so much, and he was a demigod. He was half human, half god. She loved him so much, she wanted him to be immortal. Now, we know that demigods are not immortal. And so to do this, she decided that she was going to take her infant son, Achilles, and there is a river that runs through the underworld. It's called the River Styx. And everything that went into the River Styx, if you survived going and swimming in the River Styx, you would become immortal. You'd basically become invincible. And that's what she did. She decided to dip him. She grabbed him by his ankle, dipped him in the River Styx. Now here's the problem. In the River Styx, you get in there, you may not survive the trip because it's very painful according to the myth. She dipped him in there, pulled him out, and everything that he was submerged in water, his foot and the rest of his body, was now invincible. Nothing could defeat him. All right? Except for the part where his mother grabbed him and dipped him in. Okay, that was covered by her hand. So that didn't become invincible. So that was his weak point. Now, that's the reason why when somebody says they have a weakness, it's called the Achilles heel. And I'll tell you why. Because this part right here, right there, there's a tendon right there. It's called the Achilles tendon, named after this guy. Okay, because if that ruptures or it gets cut, you can't walk. And you're kind of helpless. So anyway, that's the story of Achilles. So now you've got this invincible soldier that you need to get your revenge on Troy. All right? And that's where we're going to stop, because then we're going to start talking about what happened then, because now you got Odysseus, you've got Achilles, you've got Menelaus going after his wife, who was stolen by Paris, the prince of Troy. It's getting to be pretty epic, and it is a pretty epic story. It's pretty cool. So we'll continue that tomorrow. You get to learn the rest of the story. Until then.